everything.
Indulge me for a moment and allow me to put you in a scene. You're walking down this brightly lit hallway. The floor is lined with this blue carpet, which seems to be speckled with golden freckles, that are lit mostly by the chandeliers lining the ceiling above. As you speed walk your way down, you notice the walls beside you, decorated with these gorgeous paintings that you would love to appreciate, but you can't stop right now. You are on your way to what you think is going to be life-changing. Maybe? You think, and you take another step forward, and there you are, in front of what looks like an unassuming oak door with a brass handle. But above it, there's a tiny golden sign that says Audio 1, and you know this is where you're supposed to be. You twist the door open, and you're faced with this guy who takes your ticket. Because right now you're more distracted by the warm glow emanating from the auditorium. You're more distracted by the fact that this room is completely lined with hundreds of seats, with the exceptions of the stairs to get to them. And you're even more distracted by the number of people and the variety that you see here. You're walking down the steps to get to your seat, and on your right, you notice a kid, or well, a teenager really, who is excited to see their first play. Most likely, foot tapping, clutching to their playbill, and trying to suppress that smile on their face. And you go down farther and you notice the regulars who seem to frequent these auditoriums quite often. They're chatting and laughing and talking about the show, what they might like, what they might not. And you make your way down and you sit down in the third row center. And you overhear from behind you somebody saying, "Isn't it great that tonight is our night off and Alex is playing for the first time?" And you realize that these are actors who have come here to support their friend in what seems to be their first show. You tune it out and you look intently ahead, waiting for the lights to dim, and as if on cue, they do dim. And a spotlight falls dead center, right in front of you, on the red curtain. That seems heavy, by the way. And soon the chatter dies down. And then somebody walks out onto the stage, excited to be sure, full of energy, not necessarily wrought by the exhaustion that was going to come after the 2 hours that they would be playing on stage. No, this person came, welcomed you to the show, and said, "Enjoy, just keep your phones off," and then exited. The spotlight dims, and a light starts shining on the stage. And it fills the stage, of course. Only 1/3 of it so far because the curtains haven't opened. And then suddenly, the orchestra booms. The curtains open to reveal one of the most magnificent sets you've ever seen. It's fake, it looks very fake, but in that moment to you, with that magic, it's real. Welcome to the show where I talk about whatever I want. I'm Alia, it's nice to meet ya. And in my pursuit of existing, really, I've come to realize that the one thing that I love in everything that I love or recommend or share is heart. Obviously, a compelling story, a compelling thing about it, but mostly it's always heart. It's love and heart and comedy and laughter and all these human things and emotions that make us feel so alive. That's what humanity is. That's why AI will never work. That's why people love art. That's why art is something that people pursue when they have nothing else to worry about, or something that they pursue because they're so passionate about it. So this takes me to another space, by the way, which is musicals, which is what this video is about. And I'm excited because this is essentially me going on 50 different tangents for 20 minutes, I think. But musicals. Why musicals? I was walking around listening to my playlist while it was on shuffle one day, and one of my favorite musical numbers came up, as these tend to usually. But this time around, I had a thought, and I had a tangent that I went down. So while I was listening to Hard to Be the Bard, by the way, from Something Rotten, one of my favorite musicals that is hilarious and absurd, I started wondering, what have musicals done for me as a person? Why do I love them so much? It's fun, it's entertaining, it's hilarious, yes, but I feel like so many things have impacted me without even me knowing it, really. So, when I look at my art and I look at my art style, there are a lot of similarities that I see from stuff that I've loved a long, long time ago. But I didn't realize I was so deeply inspired by Monster High. I didn't realize I was so deeply inspired by I Love You, which was a webtoon that I read ages ago. And I'm still following it, but I read it ages ago. And I didn't realize how much it impacted me. I didn't realize that so many things were so pivotal in my artwork, which is kind of stupid when you think about it, because that's essentially what art is. It's expression of self. And so all of these observations that I've taken over time in my almost 22 years of living, by the time you're seeing this, my birthday will be next week. I'm very excited. But I'm thinking, right? Why have musicals of all things impacted me so much, and why do I love them so much? Of course, they're fun, right? But I needed to go back to the first time I ever saw or heard a musical. And that was 20 years ago, when my brother was playing Pepper in our school production of Annie. And he brought home Annie 1999 adaptation, its DVD, and I watched that like crazy. From that, I of course became a fan of Kathy Bates, Christian Chenoweth, Alan Cumming, and so many other people in that cast who were so brilliant. I remember loving that musical so much, and I didn't even process it as a musical. It was literally magical to me. Obviously, I was 2.5, 3 years old, but you get what I'm trying to say. At that moment, musicals gave me a point of reference that felt magical and whimsical, something that I still kind of have in a lot of my work today. It's not kind of, I have it in most of my work. I draw witches and wizards and dragons 90% of the time. And recently it's been like a cow person because she's my D&D character. But I'm just saying, right? That was the first time I was introduced to a musical, in addition to Cinderella, which was my favorite Disney movie growing up, along with Lilo and Stitch, of course. But the thing that struck me about Annie 1999, that adaptation, was it felt so genuine, even though they were bursting into song in the middle of the street, and I was two, so maybe my judgment was clouded, but I rewatched that adaptation recently, and I still felt the same way. I felt the same joy, I felt the same whimsy, and I felt the same sense of just, God, I like to exist here. I like existing here. I feel so blessed to be able to exist where I can experience watching something like this. You know? That's why I love the stage. That's why I love theater as well. And is that surprising? Not at all. Have you seen anything that I do? It's literally so dramatic. But I went back to watch that because I remember I either lost that DVD or that DVD broke or something, and I spent years looking for that adaptation because the only ones that would show up would be the ones that were like the other ones, and then in 2014 or something, I think they made a new one. And I watched it, but I didn't like it as much as the 1999 one. And that's what I'm trying to say. When it comes to heart, I feel like musicals kind of just execute it perfectly, precisely, and perfectly. Which I said already, I think, but like, Really, musicals make you feel whimsy in moments where you may not feel whimsical at all. For example, right now, it's like literally the world feels like it's burning. It feels like everything is bad is happening all the damn time. It's very depressing. And let's not get into all of that stuff right now because I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about musicals. That was my first introduction to musicals, really. And I loved them, obviously. And then I wasn't necessarily conscious about it. It's the same way I fell in love with anime and other interests that I have. Because I never consciously was like, oh, this is this thing that I like. It's in this category. So I'm just going to go into it knowing that it's from this category. Maybe in the future, but not at the beginning. And what musicals give us the feeling of is serendipity, which is what I want to talk about. Because that really kind of plays into art, animation, and all that fun stuff. So back to how I got the idea for this video, by the way, which was while I was listening to Hard to Be the Bard, performed by the legendary Christian Borle. I went to an interview I heard him on, I suppose. And I don't know which interview it was, but I remember him saying this one line that impacted me like crazy. It was this, that comedy doesn't need to be bit by bit, which is like you're making people laugh at this timestamp, whatever. Comedy needs space to breathe. Trust that it exists. And that, obviously, it came at a time while I was learning how to write comedy and write jokes and all that fun stuff. But I remember one of the approaches that was in that book was, hey, you have to write bit by bit, see how many laughs that you can get. Like, it's difficult, obviously, because it's comedy and comedy is very subjective, but it didn't make sense to me because then what happens to the story? What happens to the overarching plot? What happens to the characters that are trying to have a moment, right? I remember that struck me. And then I went to another one of his roles that he originated, which was Emmett from Legally Blonde, the musical, which is better than the movie, by the way. And I love them both a lot, the movie and the musical. So, talking about Legally Blonde, the musical, it goes to show that animatedness and just being dramatic, it kind of just plays into good stories, like Legally Blonde's story. So in Legally Blonde, Emmett is this character who kind of pushes Elle to grow, who is the main character of that show and that movie, that story, who follows Warner, obviously, to Harvard, and she is not doing well because he's engaged to someone else. And, well, Emmett pushes her. And she comes to the realization, which if you have not watched the movie or the musical, watch both. They're really, really good. Watch Legally Blonde. It's brilliant. So he pushes her. And this is more evident in the actual musical, which is why I like it better because they dedicate like a full-blown 7-minute song to doing that. Realize that the thing that's standing in her way from actually succeeding is the dude that she's trying to impress, which kind of shifts the entire perspective that she has for herself. And as an audience member sitting in the audience, if you've ever seen a play live, if you've ever seen a play on Broadway, you are living my dream, okay? I never have. I really want to one day, or the West End, of course, but like, my God, dream come true. But it made me realize there are a couple things that I incorporate in a lot of my work, which is essentially boiling down to the connection between film, stage, and animation specifically, because animation is what I personally specialize in. So, animation is, to quote Aaron Blaise, the exaggeration of life. And the first thing that you learn in animation school or in any kind of art school is that you have to observe, which is obviously important. But I feel like just telling students to observe something, observe life, kind of feels a bit futile because humans are 99% of the time very unclear, very stupid, and make very random action. Like, of course, you can add subtlety into it, but I don't like realistic animation because that's not what I feel like it is. Realistic in the fact that, like, you are trying to copy somebody else's movements one on one, like, to the T. I hate that. I hate that with a passion in my soul. I do not even know how to describe it. Which brings me to this point, right? We are talking about the connection between musicals, the stage theater, really, on an overarching spectrum, but we're talking about that with animation and film and what goes into that. Animation is a very unique medium in the sense that you kind of have to have an understanding of everything to have the understanding of one thing. And once you do have that understanding of everything, you're going to keep learning, and I'm going to probably keep learning from beyond my grave. But once you have that understanding of everything, you have to have the understanding of how to actually execute it, because 90% of the time, something that you do in real life is not going to translate well in animation, because that's not how animation works. You kind of have to keep working over time to figure out what works in animation. So when I talk about animation, one of the things that I try to incorporate, not just in animation, but in all of my art, is the way that the actors on stage, especially in musicals, act, which is in a very different way compared to anybody else, really. So we're talking about actors from classics like Phantom, or to like Something Rotten, or Hamilton, or In the Heights, which is one of my favorites, of course, but we're talking about the fact that when actors in musicals perform on stage, they perform with such clarity because that action needs to be clear to the person at the back of the house, right? At the farthest seat. It needs to be clear. That's the goal. But it also has to have subtlety in it. And if you notice, really, really, really good actors who perform on Broadway, like Catherine McPhee, who is coming to mind right now for her She Used to Be Mine performance. Amazing performance, but it really proves the point of what I'm trying to say. Performing with a lot of clarity and the perfect amount of subtlety, which is what people do in musicals, what actors and performers do in musicals, which is why they're so compelling, because they are so clear with what they're trying to say, and they do that every night. In addition, of course, you have times where actors forget lines on stage, where people forget lyrics, where people forget choreography, and that to do in front of a live audience is daunting, but it gives you as a performer the opportunity to really improvise and essentially blend in the next line, which you may remember, may not remember, to the scene right now. And those tend to be the most memorable moments, the natural, candid ones. But this is where acting comes into play. Because, again, because I was specializing in storyboarding early on, like in 2021 when I first started learning it, the first thing that they told us that what you need to prioritize is not this or this or this. It is clarity. Your boards need to be clear. You need to be able to see what the character is doing. That's the same thing we learned with silhouettes. You have to have clear silhouettes, which I did not learn until I watched people on stage or perform in musicals. So obviously I recommended that performance, but if you notice, every single emotion that we feel as human beings, they turn up to 1,000 in musicals, which in turn is so exaggerated but believable because to an extent, the performer is interacting with the audience because you're right there watching them. You're right there enjoying the show. You're laughing at the jokes that the writer wrote, right? You're crying when a musical number hits so hard that you're just like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. I have not cried to anything ever, but you're in that space where you're in an auditorium, You're watching an actor perform on stage and be so clear and simultaneously subtle with what they're doing that it allows you to feel the emotion that they're feeling. They're feeling that emotion in that moment and they're allowing you to witness it while singing brilliantly, by the way. So when I talk about that, another thing that like really helped me when I was learning animation or learning how to draw characters was that. Because, when I was in like middle school and high school, I used to go to the empty auditorium and perform like different musical numbers. Like, I don't know, what was it? What Baking Can Do, You'll Be Back, Hard to Beat the Bard and Someone, God, I Hate Shakespeare, to name a few, and a lot more. And I'm hoping nobody saw that. And also, I don't know why I'm admitting this because this probably tells you I did not have much of a social life. But I did participate in school plays quite a bit, which was fun because it put me in this state of observation. And I acted for the first and last time in my final year at that school. I think I played a duck, a monkey, and a munchkin in the adaptation of Wicked. It was fun. And in the last one, I played a character. But that experience of interacting with the audience as an actor, quote unquote, because this was again a school play, but making people laugh kind of unlocked this part of me that was like, I would like to make people feel and feel happy and make them laugh so hard that their guts fall out, to as a metaphor, okay? But I remember that feeling. You as an audience member are feeling something that the performer is also feeling. So while I can't speak to it at great lengths, by the way, it is something that I feel like is such a unique experience because the stage was how storytelling really started, I think. Besides like proper storytelling, I'm talking about writing and, scripting something and putting it somewhere. It was on stage. And musicals are kind of the evolution of that. Again, I mentioned Legally Blonde at the beginning. I'll also mention another musical called Kinky Boots, which brilliant musicals, both of them. They are so good at telling their stories. They're so precise. Every single musical you see is so precise. Everything has been timed to a T. And it is genuinely brilliant to see something like that play out on stage, right? So when I talk about musicals, I talk about that experience of watching a musical, performing in a musical, on stage or whatever. But really, it is about existing in the moment, which is what musicals essentially push you to do. Existing in that moment allows you to execute well in the moments where you're creating something. Which is why I think I loved musicals so much. It made me want to examine, like, why do I love musicals so much? Has it impacted any of my art? I think so, because one of the few compliments I received back when I first started, right, was like, you're really good at expressions. And I'm like, I am. And my expression sheets from back then were kind of okay, but they were still better than most expression sheets because I spent so much time acting like a dumbass on an empty stage when nobody was watching, but it really helped me actually capture that emotion, which is why I feel like I can actually feel what my characters are feeling when I draw them now. So let's get to another thing to talk about really is films, stage, and animation. Because when you go to animation school or you go to art school, you study from film usually. If it's legal art school, you study from films. And yes, you can study from films, but I don't think it's as like, yes, you can study from films, but I don't think it's as effective as studying from stage. Because with films, you have, if you're storyboarding, it's a different thing, but I'm talking about animation specifically and acting. With films, you have the luxury, really, of zooming in to, or changing the lighting, which you have on stage as well, but not to the extent of film. Changing the lighting or zooming in, doing a close-up or a medium close-up or whatever to evoke that feeling on stage from the person in the best seat in the house in the third row to the last person at the back. That emotion needs to be communicated and conveyed. And that's why when you watch actors performing on stage or in musicals, you'll notice how clear their actions are. Like, go back, watch a pro shoot, because obviously I've never watched a bootleg, but watch any kind of musical or any kind of stage performance that is professional, of course, and you will see the amount of clarity and subtlety that all the actors on stage are performing with, which is so much more important than the subtlety of an actor on film, I feel like. Even if they are good, I don't feel like it beats the stage. Not really. And the privilege that we have with film is that we can really zoom into a certain location. But on the stage, you have this one big picture that everybody's looking at once from different angles. So, but it's this one big picture. If you want to focus on a specific person, that person could be under a spotlight, but that could be too dramatic, right? If you're focusing on a specific set of people during a scene, those people have to be very clear. They may be the ones speaking, but if the people in the supporting cast are too distracting of the main primary cast member who's performing, the attention goes to them. Again, one of the main things that you learn in storytelling and creating something is you have to lead the eye. On stage, you can do that with lighting. Most of the time you do it with sets, different ways sets are made, which are brilliant, by the way, because even though you know those are fake, usually it's like a painted cardboard thing if you're in a smaller productions, but sometimes they'll have bigger sets. I would highly recommend Legally Blonde because they do that with really minimal sets, I think, compared to other things that I've seen. But seriously watch Legally Blonde the musical. It is brilliant. But the art of doing that and doing that so clearly and so well is something that needs to exist in animation, in film, in any capacity, really. So when I try to boil down what I can kind of like say is the combination of making animation or art in any capacity, it is, of course, observing from life, right? Of course, that's a very, very important part. Observing from life, observing from film, and also observing from stage. It is mixing and blending all that to find that sweet spot in the middle that allows you to convey the perfect emotion, right? I feel like that's so important, and it kind of gets skirted over, and I didn't realize how much it impacted my work, but like it worked, and it's here, and it helps me do a lot of stuff that I didn't realize it helped me do. Like, again, it's turning emotions up to 100, but it allows you to understand how to actually make things clear, not just a blanket statement of like, just make sure there's clarity. It's so learn from stage actors, learn from performers, really. And so coming to this part, right, where I've kind of explained the bit where it connects to animation and inspiration and all that stuff, I want to talk about some of my favorite musicals, in addition to like Something Rotten and Legally Blonde, and recently there's a Devil Wears Prada musical because I love the movie. I'm going to watch that hopefully one day. I don't know, I hope, I wish, I pray. And of course, you have stuff like In the Heights and Hamilton, which are obviously very popular, but you also have musical productions from Star Kid, which if you have not watched any Star Kid musicals, what are you doing? Go watch them. They are amazing, they're unique, they're brilliant in what they do. But they are genuinely amazing. Then you have, of course, as I mentioned before, Kinky Boots, and then you have classics like Hairspray, Rent, West Side Story, Phantom, and there's a lot. There's a lot. Of course, you have the Disney musicals as well, which I feel like are the only acceptable live-action version of any Disney movie or fairy tale. But it's important to understand that this medium is so unique in its execution, but is so precise, and it's been so perfected in its medium, really, that it's hard to think that most people aren't studying it. I can't go talking about musicals without mentioning the animatics that came out of Hamilton, most recently Epic, but I want to really mention watch the performers on stage. Watch them genuinely perform. Because not only is it an interaction with the audience, it is also an interaction, honestly, that actors have with themselves on the stage. It is clear, it is subtle, and it is genuine mastery that I never see anywhere else. And it's so unique. It's so why I love it so much, but like I just want to kind of push that. Like, it is insane. And, I can kind of sing, I can kind of act, and I danced for a while, and now I can't really because I haven't practiced. But when I see actors do that on stage, and I see them perform in that way, that is so genuinely, like, it's genuinely insane to me. But it is so loving in its execution. And, you have things like Smash, which explored like the musical casting process, kind of. It was a drama series. Then, of course, Schmigadoon, like, I was here for all of it, okay? I love musicals. I really do. So I just want to kind of push that fact because I love musicals. I love things that are made with heart. I feel like musicals are the prime example of that, really. And there's so many things that I don't think would exist without musicals when I think about it, really. So just go watch musicals. I like musicals. I'm just talking about musicals because I like musicals. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. But I don't think that anything really captures emotions the way musicals capture emotions, the way they express emotions. Like, you can be sitting in your car or like pacing around the hallway or whatever, singing a musical number, and you finally feel like you're heard, you're seen, you feel what you're feeling, and it is the most fulfilling experience ever. So I can't overstate that enough, really, for anything, whether it's musicals or art, movies, whatever. It's so much when there's heart in it. Like, when it comes to films, one of the films that I can think of that really uses the fact that it's a film to its advantage and makes you feel, this movie made me cry so much, which was P.S. I Love You. I have the book, but the movie made me cry so much. And I initially watched it because we're going back to the beginning. I wanted to watch it for Kathy Bates. And I had to stand up and walk around for 2 hours because it was so sincere and so heartfelt. It used the fact that it was the movie to its advantage, and it did it so insanely well that I can't even describe it, really. You should watch it. You're gonna cry. But if you need a good cry, watch P.S. I Love You. It is brilliant. And introduced me to like a whole new world of emotions when I first watched it. But like, really, it is an amazing movie. So watch it. It will make you feel. It is one of my favorite movies. But but I think that's about it. I think I've rambled enough about musicals. But I hope you got something from this because it does kind of bring me to that point of like, musicals are great, but I did not realize how much musicals helped me in my art. And I don't think I have anything else to say at the moment. So I will say goodbye for now. Take care. And if you guys like my art and all this stuff, please subscribe, like, and all that stuff. And, and, if you want to see more of my art and more unhinged crap from me, follow my Tumblr because that's the only platform I'm going to use besides this, and like sometimes Insta and all that stuff. But follow my Tumblr, subscribe, like, comment, do all the things for the algorithm and all that fun stuff. But do all the things. I will see you in the next one. Take care, keep creating.